Hello, and welcome to Retroscoping, tracing the evolution of the animated feature. I'm your host, Alexa.
And I'm Nathan.
Nathan, why are we qualified to host this podcast?
Well, I did go to the Dr. Pepper Museum twice.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
You're like almost a doctor yourself.
I'm pretty sure that's how that works.
Fantastic. Well, in our previous episode, we went through the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and today we are looking at Disney's second film, 1940's Pinocchio.
It's quite an achievement, and quite a strange film when you look back on it now.
100%.
So, how did this movie do when it actually came out in theaters?
Well, this movie was released in February 1940, and the movie was a flop. Apparently, according to Google, the budget was about $2.6 million, although different sites give varying degrees of about over $2 million. And supposedly, Disney Studios only recouped about $1 million back after that. Mind you, this budget was twice the amount that Snow White cost.
I think you can see it on screen.
Oh, 100%. It's a beautiful, gorgeous masterpiece, and apparently critics were crazy about the film. But one other thing to keep in mind is that in 1940, we are just entering into the opening stages of World War II, and so the European and Asian markets got cut off, and so the movie wasn't able to release in those markets, unfortunately. The thing is that because this movie was made such a long time ago, it has been re-released several times, and it has made back its money. Supposedly, it did finally recoup all of its losses in a 1945 re-release.
Yeah, as I understand it, that's the case with a lot of the older Disney material, is that it, a few exceptions aside, it didn't necessarily make back its original budget in its first release, but because everything Disney made is now a classic and has seen countless re-releases and comes out of the vault every few years so we can buy a new upgraded copy, they've done pretty well. It was a good long-term investment.
And going back to it being a masterpiece, Pinocchio won an Academy Award for Best Original Song for When You Wish Upon a Star, and also won an Oscar for Best Original Score. This is the first time an animated feature has won an Academy Award in a competitive category. We all know that Disney got his famed Oscar for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with one normal-sized Oscar and 7 mini Oscars, but that was more of an achievement award and not actually up against other films.
Yes, we all know that. I definitely knew that.
You didn't know that? Shirley Temple presented it to him. It's adorable.
You'll have to show me on YouTube later.
Okay. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes.
Did Shirley Temple have assistants to help bring out the 7 additional statues?
I mean, I can't say that I've looked at specifically that clip in a very long time. Perhaps. She was present, Disney was present, and also this Oscar was present. That's all I remember. Well, also as far as I know, Jiminy Crickets was actually a phrase that people used to use, not because of Disney, but because it was a, shall we say, is it a euphemism?
I believe the phrase you used earlier was a minced oath.
I've heard it called a minced oath, where instead of saying blasphemous things, we would instead say Jiminy Crickets, which has the exact same initials as some religious figures. Very similar to saying darn it or gosh.
Gosh darn it is one of my favorite phrases and a great minced oath. Who is Gosh, and why is he darning people to heck, and where is heck?
I mean, the funny thing to realize is that when we were watching Snow White is that there's a moment where all of the dwarfs see the lights on in their house, and they don't know Snow White's in there yet, and they all yell, Jiminy Cricket! It was just a very weird moment for me to realize, wait a second, but Jiminy Cricket hasn't been invented yet.
If they were making that these days, we would definitely look at it and think, oh, see how they planted the next entry in their cinematic universe? This is proof that Pinocchio and Snow White exist in the same canonical universe.
I mean, now it's all part of the Disney canon, so we can definitely go back and retrofit all of that into one giant Disney universe. Mm-hmm. Multiverse?
That game exists, right?
It's called Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never played it.
It's amazing!
I played all the other Square games, and yes, I suppose it makes sense that is the one Squaresoft game you would have played.
I mean, I'm sure I played others, but it was the most important, clearly.
Clearly.
All right. Well, Nathan, what can you tell me about the original source material for this particular weird story?
Yes, the original Pinocchio story is an Italian children's novel, and it was actually released originally serially. It was written by the author Carlo Collodi, and it was published in monthly installments in a children's magazine. It is considerably stranger than the movie, which is saying a lot because the movie is very strange. It's also considerably more complicated, which you would expect from a serialized novel where it's written month by month, and every month you have to come up with a new predicament to put them in. I haven't read the original novel, but I read a synopsis which felt about the length of a novel in and of itself. And I feel like Disney did a very good job taking some of the key elements from the marionette brought to life, to the moralizing cricket, to the turquoise fairy.
She was turquoise?
She was turquoise.
Turquoise is so much better than blue.
Actually, I'm very fond of the color blue they used in this film.
Well, it's a very lovely blue, but I just feel like turquoise is more magical.
Yes. In any case, Disney takes some of these key elements which are present in the story and rearranges them in a much simpler, more direct, effective manner. And I think the plotting of this movie feels very different to me from Snow White. It has a much more propulsive, direct quality to it. The stakes escalate in a really clear way up until that point where suddenly Geppetto's caught in a whale.
See, that's what I found really weird about this film, is it felt like installments rather than a full plot. It was just moving on to the next chapter where a new different thing happens, and I feel like that is a remnant of having come out in installments originally, so that everything feels very piece by piece and not like a through line.
One of the entertaining bits about the original that I think communicates just how pieced together it was is that Pinocchio actually kills the cricket early on in the novel.
Yes.
But that's okay, because the cricket comes back as a ghost several months later.
If I were haunted by the ghost of every bug that I have killed or have led to the killing of, I would not sleep at night.
You're going to have that nightmare tonight, and I'm really sorry.
I am definitely going to have that nightmare tonight. My rule is if the bug is inside, it has invaded my territory, and it is fair game. If the bug is outside, we are in the bug's territory, and we leave that bug alone.
I believe that's entirely consistent with just war theory.
Thank you, I think.
So, Disney takes this novel. Mm-hmm. They turn it into the film we all know and love.
Do we all know and love this film?
It is one of the classics. It's certainly one that I was more familiar with than, say, Saludos Amigos. I think I watched it a lot more even than Dumbo or Bambi. And one of the things I found really interesting about watching this is I think, obviously, Snow White sets a particular template for the Disney that we now know and love. It is the first princess film. That's an important element that we've come to associate with Disney. But this film, in many ways, I think is equally important to the Disney aesthetic, the Disney brand, the Disney image. When You Wish Upon a Star is, I think, a more important song than anything in Snow White. I think there are moments of this film when it's moving through the villages, when you're seeing a lot of its visuals that I feel like, this is Disneyland, even more so than Snow White was. I feel like it's a really important film, and I certainly feel like we all know and love it.
Yeah, well, I definitely had it on VHS as a kid, and so I watched it plenty of times. I just don't know if that's everyone's experience. And it's interesting to realize that the film was originally a flop, but in our mind as a culture, we've come to think of it as a classic. And so when you re-release it, of course, we have to buy it on VHS and DVD and Blu-ray and whatever we come up with next.
Digital downloads, of course.
True. Although Pinocchio's village is very directly the inspiration that they use in Disneyland's Fantasyland. Like, you go eat at Pinocchio's village house, and I think a lot of that architecture really bleeds into the rest of that entire area.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why I watched it. Like, yeah, this is Disneyland. This feels like Disneyland.
Mm-hmm. What I didn't realize, because I was a small child and didn't know much about the world yet, I thought that this was a German tale for some reason. I did not realize that it was Italian.
I think, even though now that I think about it, Geppetto is a fairly Italian name, there's something about him and his look and his accent that feels a bit more Germanic to me.
Well, also, cuckoo clocks are a German thing. They're not an Italian thing, so I assumed that we were in Germany. Like, there's a town in Germany that is known for its cuckoo clocks.
Yeah.
But we are in Tuscany. Beautiful Tuscany that looks nothing like any picture I've ever seen of Tuscany.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the Disney aesthetic in these early days, is that they are not especially rooted in any given culture. Ostensibly, this is Italian. The names are all Italian. But, Jiminy Cricket sounds a bit like Jimmy Stewart. And Geppetto sounds one way, and Stromboli sounds another way. And the images are just kind of pan-European fairy tale.
Pinocchio sounds adorable, though.
He does.
Had not realized how truly sweet and naive and endearing his voice really is.
That, I think, is probably the most important change Disney made from the source material, is Pinocchio is kind of a little snot.
Was he made of what little boys are made of?
It's still made of wood, but yes.
Snips and snails and puppy dog tails. That's what little boys are made of.
Yes, his whole hope is to someday be a real boy, so he's made out of snips and snails and puppy dog tails instead of wood.
I couldn't quite figure it out upon the internet. No one could give me a straight answer that I trusted. But people seem to agree that the Pino of Pinocchio at least means pine. No one could tell me what the rest of it was. Some people said it was little wooden head. Other people were trying to say that Pinocchio was maybe a colloquialism for pine nut. I don't know. Yeah.
Little Wooden Head would make the most sense in the original story. He begins life as a wood carver is making a bedpost and carves a head out of a bedpost, and the head starts talking to him, so he gives it to the puppet maker next door.
Well, how handy. What a nice neighbor.
I know. So, let's talk a little bit about the sheer animation technical expertise on display in this film.
Yes. Well, for one thing, this is where the Disney studio starts to use sculpted 3D models of its characters to help its animators stay consistent as they're drawing the characters from different angles or having different animators work on the same characters. In Snow White, they had used, of course, the models drawn on paper, which we still use to this day, but this is where they started to use actual sculpted 3D maquettes that they could turn around and work from.
One thing I noticed watching this film was how distinct the character designs and their animation styles feel. Watching Snow White, there's a very clear divide between Snow White and the prince and the other human characters look one way, they move one way, and the dwarves look and move another way. But here, Geppetto feels like a very different character from Stromboli, who was a very different character from the coachman, who was a very different character from the Blue Fairy. In terms of design, in terms of the way they move, I think I really started to see the way that the different animators and their voices as supervising animators were really showing up on screen in the individual characters they were assigned.
Definitely. And I think we see some carryover in the Blue Fairy from very specifically Snow White and the Prince and how they move with the rotoscoping. And the Blue Fairy is a gorgeous remnant of that glamorous old Hollywood, and she's fabulous. And I think it was a good use of that technique in this role because she is meant to be very ethereal and
otherworldly.
Otherworldly from the other characters. So it does work in this context.
Can I just say, brief sidebar, I really liked the Blue Fairy a lot more than I remembered. She has, especially her voice, has a certain quality. The way that she humors Pinocchio and Jiminy makes her seem at once wise and generous and kind without being too sugary sweet. She knows what's up, and she's just waiting for everyone else to catch on, but in this really sweet, winsome way.
Yeah. I hadn't really understood why people would want to Disney bound her or cosplay her in past, because she, in my mind, was always like a very minor character. But having rewatched this, I kind of want a Blue Fairy costume.
I say we start a campaign to make her Disney's #1 fairy over Tinkerbell.
What about over the fairy godmother?
Or the fairies from Sleeping Beauty.
There's a lot of fairies.
There really are.
They should start a fairy fan club.
Disney Princess is a brand. Disney Fairies should be a brand.
Well, it is. It's a Tinkerbell brand.
Well, it needs to be a little more inclusive.
Of larger fairies. Fairies of all sizes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So the Blue Fairy had these funny rules throughout the story, and we might talk about this more later, but she comes to Pinocchio twice. The final time, she lets him know, "Hey, Pinocchio, this is the last time I can help you." And she says it as if she couldn't possibly come back. But I got more of the impression that this was just to egg Pinocchio on into figuring out how to solve his problems himself the way that a good mother might, let their kid figure it out next time. No, don't call me. You can do it. And I just appreciated that about her character.
She does actually continue to help him. She just does it through intermediaries. She sends a bird with a letter to help him figure out that Geppetto's been eaten by a whale. And then at the end, she doesn't even bother to show up. She just, sends some blue light to change him to a real boy. So she's not technically lying. It is the last time she will appear to help him. It's a very technical difference.
Our old friend, the multiplane camera, is back.
It's true. There's a really beautiful multiplane, really long multiplane pan through the village that Pinocchio lives in.
It's impressive.
Yeah. There's a lot of really clever, interesting, great camera work in this movie. I'd say camera work because I'm not sure what else you would call it. But in addition to that multiplane sequence, which I think really helps this movie to feel much bigger than Snow White, more like it takes place in a bigger world, there's also a really funny moment when Jiminy is first introduced where we see from his point of view and the camera kind of jumps up and down towards the house as if
it's a cricket.
Like it's a cricket. And there's a really lovely overhead kind of pan tracking shot of Pinocchio and Honest John and the cat whose name I can never remember. Gideon, as they sing An Actor's Life for Me, which must have been really dizzying to have to work out in advance what the perspective on that camera move would look like, because it's all overhead, but it does kind of like pan from left and right and move about, and it's very impressive. There's a lot of shots like that.
Yeah, they're just using it all over this movie, quite honestly. But those are some of the most impressive shots that really stand out.
And of course, it's much like Snow White, and even more so, there's an incredible attention to detail in this film. There's so much wood carving in every corner of every frame. Figaro's bed is carved with images of cats and mice. There's the chaos of Pleasure Island, which just has so many things going on. There's this great attention to shadows. When Geppetto moves in front of a fire, his gown becomes translucent and you can see the silhouettes of his legs. And you can see like how knobby and shaking his fingers are in certain shots. It's just so richly detailed.
That's why it's a masterpiece.
It's why it was so expensive.
I know.
So, I guess more broadly, we've talked a lot about, how does it look? How was the tech involved? Where does it fit within the canon? Just what are your impressions of it as a film?
I mean, I definitely noticed that it felt more discombobulated as we just moved from section to section without necessarily having much to string it together. I also realized that throughout most of the film, this version of Pinocchio, I really can't blame him for the trouble that he gets into. It's a lot of him being whisked away by forces that are stronger than himself and by people who are smarter than him or know more about the world than he does. And I felt really bad for him because he was just a really ill-informed puppet.
I think you can give Pinocchio some slack on his moral culpability. He was literally born yesterday.
This is true.
I think the only moment where he really, you gotta blame him, after Honest John talks him into joining the theater, Jiminy catches up to him, and Jiminy explains, well, no, you have to go to school. This is the right thing to do. It's what your father wants you to do. You can't take the easy path. Pinocchio says, yes, that is the right thing to do. Bye, Jiminy, and goes straight off to the theater. That one, he could have made a better choice. But, at other points in the film, he's just straight up being abducted. Not a lot he can do.
I still want to say during that scene, I don't know that Jiminy has very well explained why so much as he is just telling Pinocchio, no, you have to do this because this is the right thing.
It's true.
It's not
Jiminy's
like Pinocchio.
Not a great conscience.
He's really not a great conscience. I never realized this before. I grew up thinking he was the best conscience ever. And for a conscience, I was surprised by how interested he is in the ladies.
Oh, yes. He's very interested in the ladies.
So much interest in the ladies.
All kinds of ladies. Fairy ladies, wooden ladies.
Porcelain ladies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's as much a learning experience for Jiminy as it is for Pinocchio.
Sure.
But Yeah, I actually think the moral world of Pinocchio was really interesting. I think it's a much more complex picture than you usually get in this kind of children's fairy tale. There's a lot of attention paid to what is temptation and how do you resist it? What is, the easy path versus the hard but ultimately good path? And I think at a real level of the magic on display here, one of the things that's really interesting about it is that Pinocchio's promise is that if he is a good boy, he can become a real boy. But the actual plot of the film, he's going to become a real something either way. He can become a real boy, or he can become a real animal. If he gives in to his baser desires, the magic of Pleasure Island will have its own way with him and turn him into something less than a real boy. I think that is a surprisingly insightful moral lesson, that we do grow up. We do become more than we begin life as. The question is, what are we growing up into?
My mind is blown. I did not get that at all.
Well, I took a philosophy course once.
So did I. I did not enjoy my time.
And, there are lots of insight in the way that someone like Pinocchio can be deluded. He can be deluded by false expertise, with Honest John babbling a bunch of, psychotherapy jargon at him. He can be deluded by the promise of an easy path. He can be deluded, like all boys, by the desire of wanton destruction. But ultimately, it's in sacrifice that he learns to really be good.
I'm now doing a gender count in my mind, and I was about to say the only female in this film is the Blue Fairy, but that would be incorrect. Cleo is also a girl, but she's a fish.
Yeah, I'm going to give that 1.5 women in the film.
Yeah. Everyone else is male.
Yeah, that is true.
90% of this film's cast is male.
Yeah, and I didn't watch specifically for this, but I assume everyone in Pleasure Island is a little boy.
Yeah, it's built specifically for little boys. Well,
I'm sure, in the film's world, maybe you don't see them, but there's at least one girl that are really enjoying all of the blowing things up and, smoking cigars and having non-specific beverages.
I mean, I would like to imagine that this little girl exists. I mean, maybe not.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated.
Do we want to walk through the film a little bit more chronologically at this point?
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
So we open, as Snow White did, on a storybook, but this time we have a narrator character.
We do!
And it's our favorite Jiminy Cricket.
I also noticed in this shot, which I haven't done the math yet, but the two books that are behind him in this opening shot as he's finishing the notes of When You Wish Upon a Star, there's Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland on the book spines behind him, which eventually will become Disney movies. I think they're a little too far away temporally to really have been placed there specifically, but that is just interesting to note.
Yeah, like I said, setting up the Disney Cinematic Universe. They were doing it even back then.
I know!
There's also a shot I noticed, one of the wood carvings in Geppetto's house looks an awful lot like the Queen from Alice in Wonderland.
Interesting.
I think it's way too early for that to be intentional. But
are you talking about the really angry-looking wood carving that Jiminy talks to and says he can't please everybody?
Maybe.
Okay, never mind then. Anyway, but this is around the time as Jiminy opens the storybook and we go into the picture and become Jiminy Cricket for that really cool camera move where we hop like a cricket up onto the sill and check out the inside of Geppetto's house and dressed as a, what's that old-timey word?
Hobo?
Hobo.
Yes, he doesn't yet have the spiffy outfit we've all come to associate with Jiminy Cricket. One of the things I really like about this film visually is that because Jiminy is so small in relation to everything else, everything has to work kind of at like a macro and a micro level. And so it's really great that Geppetto has made all of these tiny little cuckoo clocks, because for the next 20 minutes we're going to spend a lot of time with Jiminy wandering in and among the miniature figurines, doing little dances, having little, slapstick moments with cuckoo clocks, and it all plays really well in the world of the larger characters bouncing back and forth.
Oh, totally. And this is a lot of like visceral memory stuff that I have from being a kid and watching Jiminy interact with the gears that he gets stuck in under the music box.
I actually was really hypnotized by a lot of the marionette movement in this film. The animators did some really great work capturing that kind of loose, flowing quality of it. And I imagine it was really hard to learn to master.
Well, apparently someone also made them like 3D versions of the cuckoo clock so that they could also study the movement of those particular kinds of wooden people and the gears and how they kind of stutter. And
well, all the research paid off.
Geppetto also has a lot of really naughty cuckoo clocks.
Oh, yes. Tell me more.
Well, he has a cuckoo clock of a drunk man hiccuping, and then he has another cuckoo clock of a mother spanking the bare butt of her child.
Yeah, this movie has a lot of interest in butts.
It's very preoccupied with butts. And once Nathan turned to me and said this, I could not stop seeing butts everywhere.
Within the first 5 minutes, I swear, there's a joke about Jiminy warming his butt by the fire.
He accidentally puts his hand on a porcelain girl's butt and then realizes what he's done. And
Geppetto has a line about how, and they'll make you a little wooden seat in case you fall over.
And of course, later on in the film, like Gideon dusts Pinocchio's butt for a while, and then we get from Jiminy's point of view, looking up at the 3 big butts of Honest John and Gideon and Pinocchio, and you're just like, yeah, no, I think this film really likes butts.
Butts.
So many butts. But yeah, go ahead and watch this film and tell us that there's not a lot of butts.
Listeners, I dare you to disagree. Yeah, so anyway, Geppetto, who's just the sweetest, hanging out with his cat, Figaro, and his fish, Cleo, he subsequently wishes, as he finishes a marionette, oh, if only this marionette could be a real boy. And because, in Disney fairy tales, good people's wishes are always rewarded, the blue fairy appears to make that wish come true. Pinocchio comes to life. Geppetto is elated. They dance around for a bit, and he sends Pinocchio off to school.
You know what? I think it's very sweet and strange that Geppetto did not think to maybe warn Pinocchio's teacher.
I suppose it's never really a question that's answered, because Pinocchio never makes it to school. Then again, this is also a world where talking cats just wander around and no one thinks it's strange, so I imagine they're used to strange things.
I guess, but also, like, it would have been nice to show Pinocchio where school is. Explain to his teacher how he came to be. And he just sends him out the door and assumes that he'll go to school. And then is very sad when Pinocchio does not come back from school. And I'm like, well,
you could have at least given him a map.
Not that he could read. He can't read yet. What's a map going to do? Anyway, so he means to go to school, but gets a little waylaid.
By Honest John and
Gideon.
Yes, that cat whose name I can never remember, Gideon.
Another thing that I found interesting as a correlation between Snow White and Pinocchio was that Gideon is a mute character who acts very much in the same mannerisms as Dopey.
Yeah, Honest John and Gideon have a relationship which I feel like has got to be a comedy duo trope. You can sort of see it now in Penn and Teller, where you have one incredibly verbose, loquacious character and one who literally never speaks.
Yeah, well, for me, it was just this interesting question of Dopey happens to live with 6 other people who are all very well-meaning and honest people, and so that's the sort of life he gets to live. But in Gideon's case, same character, but getting whisked away by someone who is a lot smarter and wants to have his way in the world, and so now Gideon is a villain, whereas Dopey is not, purely based on the people that they hang out with. So there's another moral for you.
Brief sidebar, I love a lot of the designs in this film. I don't really love the designs for Honest John and Gideon. There's something sort of overly scribbly about them that I think they don't pop the same way a lot of the other designs. How did you feel about them?
Honest John definitely looks weird to me. Like, he doesn't look like any other Disney character. He doesn't have that essence that you just look at him and go, oh, that's a Disney character. Gideon, same problem, but in a different way, where I feel like Gideon looks much more like maybe a Fleischer character or something else from the earlier decades of the black and white floppy noodle arm characters. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really feel like the Disney feature designs that we're beginning to see emerge.
Yeah.
But to be fair, for this film, it took them a very long time to even settle on designs for Pinocchio and Jiminy. You know, it took them a really long time to work those out.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of visual diversity to the kinds of character designs that they've got in this film. And I think they are sort of experimenting with different ways that people can look. And some of those would go on, I think, to be very common, iconic Disney looks. And some, like the Coachman, while interesting, doesn't feel like a Disney character in the same way.
Yeah, I think the Coachman still gets a little closer. But yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think they're trying out things here. So they entice Pinocchio with the thought of being an actor, which brings about two of my favorite lines from the film. What does an actor need with a conscience?
Yes. Although, again, to be fair, Pinocchio's been told to stay away from temptation and to do the right thing. But he doesn't know what temptation is or why anything is good or bad. Oh. So he really just gets literally picked up and whisked away by Honest John. So he's really just being overpowered by a force stronger than himself.
Mm-hmm. So he's taken... He actually puts on a very nice little show.
Yeah.
It's a well put together stage show.
You know, I was actually surprised how big of a jump in time we go from Hi-Diddle-Dee-Dee, An Actor's Life for me, straight into the night of Pinocchio's first performance. And so this is the first moment where we meet Stromboli, is him also watching Pinocchio's act.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the marionette movements in this film are really hypnotic, and especially all together on stage in these elaborate dance sequences. It's really compelling material. And I think, you know, there's a lot, because this is a much more theatrical kind of movie in a lot of ways than Snow White was, there's a lot of really nice dance choreography in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have seen in Snow White.
Yeah.
And so you get to see some of that on display here. It's really cool. And then we find out, of course, that Stromboli, not a good boss.
Yes. But I've just had a thought. If Stromboli was in the audience and Pinocchio is on stage, who is controlling the other marionettes?
Maybe it's the weird, creepy demon apes from Pleasure Island.
Probably not. Because as far as we know, Stromboli works alone.
Maybe he's built an elaborate array of machines. He's actually a technical genius.
This explains a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry. Continue.
Right. Stromboli, kind of a bad boss. Not actually going to pay you for your labor. Going to enslave you instead and lock you in a cage.
I finally, as an adult, understand the moment where they're sitting on... Well, Pinocchio is sitting on Stromboli's desk, and Stromboli is counting his money, and he picks up a coin with a square in it, and in his conversation with Pinocchio, he bites the coin and bends it, and then he gets really mad, and then he hands the coin to Pinocchio as if he's paying Pinocchio, and I finally understood. Oh, if you can bite and bend a coin, it meant that it was fake money. So Stromboli's mad because someone cheated him and gave him a coin that is no good, which is why he throws a small snit fit and then gives the coin to Pinocchio because the coin is worthless to him.
So, Stromboli throws Pinocchio into the cage. Luckily, Jiminy Cricket has returned to wish Pinocchio well, just in time to fail to save him.
Thank goodness for the Blue Fairy.
Who comes back for an encore appearance. This is where we get the famous, when you tell a lie, it grows and grows until it is as clear as the nose on your face. I actually really liked the sort of absurd gag where the nose continues to grow longer and longer until it turns into a tree branch with a nest and a bird.
Several birds.
Several birds. I mean, if Pinocchio kept lying, like, he could have populated an entire forest.
This is how we can stop deforestation. If we all get together and communally lie. Save the Amazon.
All right, we'll get to work on that. We'll start a Facebook group.
Yes. Well, all we really need is just a room of politicians. I'm hilarious.
So hilarious.
Anyway. Yes, so we have the it's not good to lie scene, and the Blue Fairy goes ahead and fixes his nose, lets him out of the cage, but also warns that she will not be able to help him again.
Luckily, he's got Jiminy, who will continue to be largely useless. So, Pinocchio kindly heads back home.
Well, he tries.
He tries.
He tries.
But he's intercepted once more by Honest John and Gideon,
who have had an interlude with the coachman.
And the coachman has promised a hefty sum of money for any wayward young boys that they can deliver to him. And Pinocchio's close enough to being a young boy that they whisk him right off the street with some psychoanalytical gibberish.
I really loved Honest John performing a doctor's examination of Pinocchio because I feel like they did a really great job selling it and making it so confusing, but also delightful.
It's one of my favorite genres of writing, actually, is the things that on one level sound like they make sense, but actually are complete nonsense.
If you say something with confidence, people believe you.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, Honest John hands him a playing card, and tells Pinocchio that it's his ticket to Pleasure Island, which is the cure for what ails him. And I finally realized how adorable it is that Pinocchio is riding on the coach, waving his card around and trying to tell people, this is my ticket that Honest John gave me. And it's like, oh, that's so sweet. That's the ace of spades. Sweet baby.
Oh, that's the card of death.
Is it?
Ace of spades?
Ace of spades?
Yeah.
It's the card of death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, Pinocchio believes everyone really is his problem. When Jiminy's talking to him, he believes Jiminy. When Geppetto's talking to him, he believes Geppetto. When the Blue Fairy's talking to him, he believes the Blue Fairy. And when Honest John's talking to him, he believes Honest John. I mean, his name is Honest John. Why wouldn't you?
I don't know that I feel like that's a fault for Pinocchio, though.
Yes, perhaps that is the real lesson of moral instruction that Pinocchio is supposed to communicate to the parents that are watching it with their children is children aren't terribly bright. You have to make sure that you guide them well.
I mean, in a way, like, he's a very similar character to SpongeBob.
Go on.
Well, they're both very earnest and childish and really just want to please people, and whoever they happen to be with is the person that they want to please. That's just very inherent to their character, and they're very endearing in this, and they are wholehearted in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Pinocchio's case, that doesn't work out terribly well for him.
I know.
He gets carted off along with a bunch of young hooligans to the misleadingly named Pleasure Island.
Is it misleadingly named?
Well, you know, it starts with a little pleasure and then becomes a horrifying nightmare. This section has really haunted me.
Tell me more.
There's a moment, so after you've spent enough time in Pleasure Island, you start turning into a donkey. And there's a scene which scarred me as a young child, wherein the coachman is separating the complete donkeys from the mostly donkeys. And there is a little donkey dressed in a kid's outfit that bells, "My name's Alexander!" And he just seems so terrified and so sad.
He is. He's also voiced by Pinocchio.
Oh, so, and then he's put back in one cage so that he can spend a little more time and eventually turn into a completely voiceless, completely animal donkey.
I'm still unclear about whether it is the amount of bad behavior you displayed that turns you into a donkey, or if it is simply time spent on this island that turns you into a donkey.
Or if it's the drink.
Literally the drink?
Well, the way they stage it when Pinocchio and his new boring friend Lampwick, as they start chugging their non-specified beverage, then they start turning into donkeys. I don't know if that's really intended to be the mechanism, but that's kind of the way it plays out.
Okay, that's your interpretation.
Sure, I'll go with that.
Okay.
Because, you know, Pinocchio starts drinking and then sees Lampwick start to change and stops drinking, and that's why he only gets half transformed.
Which is also a fun gag for the, oh, I think I've had too much. I am seeing my friend turn into a donkey. I'm going to set this aside.
The expressions in this scene are a delight.
I mean, honestly, the expressions in this entire movie were a delight. Like, the expressions on Pinocchio's face earlier when he was in Strompoli's cage were so heartbreaking. I didn't realize that the animators were capable of that at this point in time, and it was just really heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. But yes, also in this scene on Pleasure Island. Mm-hmm. Quite good.
So, Pinocchio's friend turns into a donkey. Pinocchio himself gets some donkey ears and a tail. Luckily, Jiminy is there once again to help him get out of this situation. There's not a lot of attention paid to how they get out of the island. They just run and eventually reach the coast, jump in the water.
Because it's an island.
And swim to shore. Properly chastened by this experience, they head back home to Geppetto's house. And it's empty. There's cobwebs. It looks like no one has been there in months. And you ask yourself, how long has Pinocchio been gone?
As far as we know, only a day. But a day is long enough to get swallowed by a whale.
Yeah.
But don't forget your fish and your cat.
Yeah, I'm also just sort of perplexed that in this time period, Geppetto was like, well, I don't know where Pinocchio is. He got lost on the way to school. I shall sail the ocean.
Obviously.
Yes. All of this happens off screen. So we just get a letter from the Blue Fairy explaining the plot.
Brought to you by Carrier Pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
Or Dove.
Probably a dove. I mean, I think the Blue Fairy's, high enough rent she can afford a dove.
Aren't doves pigeons?
They're pretty pigeons.
Sure. Anyway, brought to you by a dove.
Pinocchio and Jiminy summarily head off back to the ocean with the plan to find Geppetto, who has been swallowed by Monstro, the giant whale. Luckily, it turns out not to be terribly hard to find Monstro.
They do spend a lot of time on the ocean floor asking around, and as soon as you say Monstro's name, it's like he who must not be named, and the fish all swim away. There's some really nice underwater effects during this.
Yeah, some really great, warping effects. It appears that their underwater effect is lots of bubbles and, rubbing some Vaseline on the cells in different places to make it look a little fuzzy.
Yeah, and there's, the animation in the scene is just truly beautiful. There's this beautiful sea anemone garden that Pinocchio goes through, and as he passes through all the sea anemones, they all suck clothes as he passes by, and it's just fascinating to watch and think about how much that would have taken to animate.
Twice as expensive as Snow White.
So expensive.
So eventually they find Monstro.
They do find Monstro.
So enormous that he is a background painting.
And he's just chilling like Jabba the Hutt at the bottom of the ocean. Mm-hmm. Apparently whales in this movie do not need to move or breathe.
And I think Monstro is really a stunning design, really strange and ominous, and it's fascinating to me how you never really get a super clear glimpse of him. He's asleep, and then when he starts moving, he's just constantly surrounded by water effects and smoke and waves, and he's just this giant dark force of nature chasing down the characters with, the world exploding in his wake.
Well, I think it also helps to sell how truly large he is, that he's so huge. He can't fit in the frame.
Mm-hmm. You gave me a look when I said it was a great design, though. You disagree?
He's a big fat whale. What's to design? No, sorry. I'm sure someone spent a lot of time designing him, but to me, he's just a big box that is blue and has an eyeball.
A big, ominous box with an ominous eyeball.
True facts. At least by this point, we've set up that neither Pinocchio nor Jiminy Cricket need to breathe underwater, which is a handy trick.
Mm-hmm. Pinocchio, I understand. Jiminy is a bit of a mystery. Maybe like in the novel, he's actually a ghost.
He was a ghost the whole time. That's the twist of the film. So Geppetto is chilling inside with Figaro and Cleo, and they've been fishing for a while inside of Monstro, trying to catch their dinner.
It's a really beautiful shot the first time you see inside of Monstro, this cavernous rib cage soaring above the tiny broken boat with its kind of flickering fire. Really spooky and strange.
And they have to wait for Monstro to open his mouth when he sees a school of tuna going by, and then all of a sudden...
Not cute tuna.
Not cute tuna.
All the other fish are cute. The fish that Monstro eats, not cute.
Well, otherwise we'd be sad that he's eating them.
Mm-hmm.
If they were cute.
Precisely.
We don't like to eat cute things.
No. Cuteness is, I think, an excellent evolutionary defense mechanism.
So anyway, Monstro starts to open his mouth and eat the tunas, and Geppetto's trying to catch as many tuna fish as possible. And Pinocchio is now worried about being eaten by Monstro, so he swims away from Monstro but gets eaten anyway, thus accomplishing his original goal of trying to find his father who was inside of Monstro.
And find him he does. Geppetto seems resigned to his existence. He's just happy to see his son, and, maybe they can do some father-son fishing together.
This is the first real original and quite clever idea that Pinocchio has ever had when he realizes, wait a second, we could make a fire and make Monstro open his mouth for us so that we could use the raft that Geppetto has already built to swim out.
Which, I will say, in his brief time on Earth, Pinocchio's had good opportunity to learn the basics necessary for this decision. When he caught his finger on fire in his opening scenes and doused it in Cleo's fishbowl, he got to see how badly Cleo reacted to all the smoke in the water, and he spent a lot of time on Pleasure Island destroying and burning things. So, he's a real pro at this point.
One of the things I forgot to say about Pleasure Island is they have one whole setup where they have a model home that they have given boys bats to take to and rocks to throw at stained glass. And, it's not unlike some experiences I have seen around LA that are supposed to help people blow off stress and steam, where you go into like destruction batting cages and you can beat up cars or you can destroy vases and vases.
I didn't know these existed.
So back to Monstro.
Yeah, back to Monstro. So
Pinocchio is good at fire.
Pinocchio is very good at fire. And he causes Monstro to give a great big sneeze.
And at first, Monstro sneezes them out, but then he starts building another sneeze, which sucks them back in. And then sends them flying out again, and then starts to suck them back in. There's a lot of tension of like, will they, won't they escape?
The sequence that follows is really just a stunning piece of effects animation. The way the water moves and crashes, it really reminds me of, that wave painting. The one wave painting that everyone knows.
The Japanese wave painting?
Yes.
Do you possibly mean the Great Wave off Kanagawa?
I do mean that, yes.
By Hokusai. Anyway, Geppetto washes up on shore. Shortly after, the missing Cleo and Figaro wash up on shore. And then we check in on Jiminy Cricket, who thankfully is also washed up on shore. And then we are shown a very terrifying shot of Pinocchio face down in the water, which is interesting if only because we spent an entire scene establishing that Pinocchio does not need to breathe. So I'm unclear what happened.
Yes, he certainly appears to be dead at this point, which raises certain questions like, what exactly killed him if he can't drown?
Well, maybe I picked this up as a kid, but I never thought Pinocchio was dead. But that was also formed by a lot of movies where we all think they're dead, but then it turns out they were alive the whole time. So, again, if he didn't have to breathe underwater, I feel like, he was just resting.
Yes, it's a lot of exertion. So, they're very sad. Everyone else thinks he's dead. But in saving his father, I guess he did just enough good deeds to earn his right to be a real boy. And the Blue Fairy sends her light to transform him into kind of a creepy, weird-looking little boy.
I don't like Pinocchio's new nose. I liked his old nose better.
Yeah, it's almost cute, but it misses and hits creepy instead.
Yeah. I am also unclear that Pinocchio earned this so much as maybe the Blue Fairy feels like it's gone on for far enough. Now I guess you can be a real boy.
I don't know. I think that's,
He didn't do anything.
He saved his father.
He built a
risked
fire.
his life to do it.
He did not risk his life. He could breathe underwater. There was nothing to risk.
Well, you could be chomped up by a giant whale. I mean, Pinocchio's tough. I don't know how well he's gonna survive being digested.
Well, apparently you don't have to be digested. You can just sit in the stomach eternally.
You didn't know that.
I don't feel like Pinocchio earned this. I feel like the Blue Fairy is just really nice.
I will just about buy that Pinocchio's earned it. Jiminy has not earned his official conscience badge that she gives him. In fact, the last bit of consciencing he did was trying to convince Pinocchio not to go save his father.
Okay, but see, she tells Pinocchio, if you're good, you can be a real boy, and then tells Jiminy that he's his conscience. If Pinocchio earns being a real boy, then Jiminy has been a good conscience.
I see. So it's a results-based award, not a, effort-based award.
Precisely. Yes. Well, so I guess specifically Pinocchio had to prove that he was truthful, wise, and unselfish, and he did have moments of each of these.
Yeah, I'll buy that. He doesn't really lie after the nose-growing scene.
Does he have occasion to?
Not really.
Yeah, so he did that thing once where he told the truth, and he did that thing once where he had a smart thought, and did that thing once where he had an unselfish moment.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently that will buy you being a real boy.
Mm-hmm. Even if you've been dead for a little while.
Again, I still don't think he was dead.
Also, there's one thing I really appreciate about, the tight plotting of Beauty and the Beast is that moment where everything converges, where, the beast is on death's door, but it's also the satisfaction of the curse, and so he's saved just by, the nick of time. In these earlier fairy tales, it's more like, yeah, I don't know, we'll bring you back to life when we get around to it. No rush.
This scene reminds me a fair bit of Snow White in that it's we're so sad you're dead, but it turns out you're not dead.
Mm-hmm. So, Pinocchio's a real boy, Jiminy's an official conscience, and they all live happily ever after.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's Pinocchio. One final thought as we go out, thinking about the moral of this film. It is a common trope that, of course, as the song so clearly states, when you wish upon a star, anything your heart desires will come to you. And Pinocchio gets most of the things that he wants. He wants to be a star. He gets to be a star. He wants to go to Pleasure Island. He gets to go to Pleasure Island. He wants to be a real boy. He gets to be a real boy. He gets everything his heart desires. But it becomes clear over the course of the film that some heart's desires are better than others. And the real trick in life is figuring out which wishes are worth making. So, on that note,
we are retroscoping, tracing the evolution of feature animation. And we invite you all to watch these movies with us. Our next film is going to be Fantasia, so get that queued up in your streaming service, or if you're super cool like us, DVD player.
Or, no judgment, if you still have a VHS in your parents' cabinet.
Anyway, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this movie? Is it a beautiful masterpiece? What do you think the moral is? So, watch along with us. Let us hear your thoughts or any topics that you'd like to talk about. If you enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast player. You can write us at retroscoping@gmail.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Retroscoping.
All right. So long. Farewell.
Now go live happily ever after. Butts.